Hi, everybody. I am David Clergett, and this is my presentation on Dr. Brian Wesolowski's article, Understanding and Developing Rubrics for Music Performance Assessment. Okay, if you pardon me for just one moment, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can show you the PowerPoint presentation that I have for you guys today. Get this off of here, and here we are. All right. Understanding and Developing Rubrics for Music Performance Assessment by Dr. Brian Wesolowski. Dr. Brian Wesolowski is the Associate Professor of Music Education at the Hugh Hodgson School of Music, the University of Georgia. He had his bachelor's and master's degrees from Oberlin Conservatory, with an additional master's degree from the University of Texas and his PhD at the University of Miami. His teaching focuses on graduate education, quantitative research design, assessment and policy in music education, which is particularly appropriate for the article that he's written. That's one of his specialties, educational measurement, and statistical programming. He currently serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Research in Music Education, a publication which I'm certainly familiar with, and many of you probably are as well. And he's also the chair of NAFME's Assessment Special Research Interest Group. So he's involved in a lot of things regarding assessment and evaluation of students in music classes. So here's what we're going to be going through today. We're going to be going through first a summary of the article, a critique and practical application, conclusion and overall impression, and then I will share for you at the end my references, including the two outside sources that I used for the article. First, the article summary. There are two important aspects to assessment, and they are measurement of performance and then the evaluation of the data. The more we know about a student's learning, the better we can make sure that, first of all, the students are learning, and it also makes us better able to make sure, like I said, make sure better the students are learning, but then also the students can acquire that learning. Pardon me. The students can acquire that learning a lot better the more we know about it. And also we can be involving parents better in the entire process. Of course, there have been many books written to achieve the goals that we just mentioned, the ensuring the learning, ensuring the students can learn, they actually acquire the learning better, and then also about involving parents in the process. But according to Dr. Wesolowski, he says that these always focus on generic test items. They've only got single answers, and they haven't really done much in terms of assessing expression, which is something very important to music classrooms, and also divergent responses. Many music educators haven't really developed a way to connect their assessments to the school or district grading system, and they tend to rely on behavior or other non-musical aspects to develop the student's grade. I know I can't see you guys doing this because you'll be viewing the presentation later, but raise your hand if you're guilty of anything in that last statement. I'm going to raise my hand because I did it. I've done it all. All right, this is my 10th year of teaching elementary general music. I've done it all in that, in terms of trying to figure out a good way to assess my students, to turn that into a numeric score so that then I can put it into an online grading system and turn it into some sort of quantity that can be represented that can then be interpreted as A, B, C, D, or E, or whatever their letter grade system is, because sometimes for K and 1, they use a more descriptive grading system, but still for some reason I'm supposed to give them a percentage grade or a number that can be turned into it so that then it can be translated into this whatever other descriptive grade that they've decided they want to use. And again, until I went to a seminar, and I feel kind of silly saying this, but I went to a seminar my first year of teaching on exactly the next thing, then relying on student behavior, grading based on behavior. And if any of you guys know Dr. Sue Finger, but she's the one that kind of turned me off from doing that. She said, we don't grade on behavior. That's not what we do. And then the more I started to think about that, right after she said it, it came to the point where, yeah, that's right. Is the way that they behave, if they're talking out, or if they forget to raise their hand, or if they're up out of their seat, that really doesn't have much to do with their achievement in music. So really, that's not one of the things that should go into their grade. And so those are just kind of the types of things that we do that really we probably should find a better way to develop the grade. And that's what Dr. Wesolowski is trying to say here with that particular statement. Complexities of assessment. Assessment's a really complex process. It's got a really subjective nature, and that is the main problem with trying to assess in a music classroom. Is it is so complex and it's so subjective. So he says that validity can be improved by developing objective measurements based on human value judgments. So I think that most of us, if we've been in a classroom for even for a year, or even not even a year, if you've completed or you're completed undergrad, because we're all grad students, you completed your undergrad, you've done something with rubrics, they've shown you how to make one, you make your categories, you make your levels of proficiency across the top, you assign a point value to each one, and then you write descriptions for each of the boxes. You start with what you think the perfect performance is going to be, and that gets your highest score. And then you take some components out of it that you think might be appropriate to remove, and then that's your next level down, and so on and so forth, until finally you get to whatever is going to merit whatever the lowest score is. And of course, when I make rubrics myself, I've got a 4-point grading system, but the top 2 categories are both 4. They're both 100%, because it's proficient and then sort of an out of this world type of category where it includes can teach the topic to others. Some people saw this in one of my discussion board comments, because I mentioned that as a way that I make rubrics. And then the next one down is proficient. Well, that's exactly where I want to be. So that's the reason why that particular category also gets a 4, because if they can do it exactly they're meeting expectations, why shouldn't they get 100%? So that's my philosophy on that. And then the next one down is a 3, and that's basic, meaning, okay, you're kind of showing me that you're on your way, you're on the right path, you understand some of this, but you're not really doing it correctly yet. And then of course, the next one down is 2, and that's the lowest. And that is, you attempted it, the student attempted it, but it really wasn't very good. They don't have any understanding of it, because 2 out of 4 is still an F. And I mean, you got to ask yourself at some point, when is it too harsh on their grade? So to really just keep taking points. I used to give zeros for students. I like give a 0 in a category if a student didn't even show me anything with it, but I don't do that even anymore. I mean, that's included in 2 points. And I mean, it gets the idea across, and they still get they still get some credit, I guess, for being there, if you want to call that participation. I don't really do that anymore. But let's move on. So the rubric can be an effective tool for quantifying that, for developing that objective measurement that anybody can look at and say, okay, this is what they did, and that's why they got the score they got. And that's kind of the way I was trained. I mean, I guess if you did your undergrad at Ball State, between 2002 and 2008, then you got the same education I did on it. And that's the way we were trained to make rubrics. It was the idea of you're going to have you're going to have those categories, and you're going to say, okay, this is why, and then you marked it, and then that's what we taught. And again, and I say it that way because I can't speak for everybody's individual experience in terms of what they went through in an undergraduate program. So moving on, summative and diagnostic assessments. What they do is they relate the learning to the quantification of errors. So in essence, what this means, even if you're using a rubric as a summative evaluation or a diagnostic assessment, what you're doing with that is you're basically looking at how many mistakes does the student make. And depending on what that number is, that quantity is going to land them in a grade spectrum, right? In a grade band or something. And that's how you're going to determine what their overall result is. Okay. But then here's an interesting thing that I didn't really think about until I read this article. And that is, or it's an assessment of the student's adeptness regarding the teacher's toleration of mistakes. So it's either simply a quantification of their errors, or, well, it is a quantification of their errors, but it's either indicative of learning, or it's indicative of their ability to guess what you're going to think is an error, or it's their ability to know exactly how many mistakes can they make before you knock them down to that next level. And so that's where this could become an issue using, for summative and diagnostic assessments. And of course, the last point is, I think it's either it's obvious to you guys, or it makes perfect sense that it can help you better monitor student performance progress. I mean, when you take those assessments and you look at the rubrics and you see where they are, it's almost impossible not to adjust your instruction based on what you see in that rubric, based on what you see in whatever, even if you're just doing numerical scale scores. You can tell exactly who needs the help, you can tell exactly what they need the help in, and then you can design the next activity or part of the activity, or design your centers or groups or the next sectionals you go to help those exact group of people to get the exact targeted instruction that they need to be able to do the things that they didn't do so hot on in the last assessment that you took. And so, I mean, I think that's a very good point there. And it's something we can use to help us determine the specific areas that our students need assistance in, and also to help them to design instruction, not only to monitor the performance progress as it says in the on the statement there, but also to develop new ideas and to develop new activities that will help them actually achieve more. And I think that's the goal for all of us. Moving on, rating scales. So Dr. Wesolowski goes into a discussion of some different types of rating scales, the Likert type questions and the criteria specific scales. Of course, Likert type questions, you're graded, or it grades each series of statements or questions based on your degree of agreement or disagreement with whatever the statement or question is. Usually it's just a bunch of statements, and then it's, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. We've all probably taken surveys that look exactly like that. Those are called Likert type questions. And then there's the criteria specific type of rating scale, which is where you have things that are listed out in terms of course objectives or even learning outcomes. And so you've organized everything in a different way. It's not just a bunch of statements you agree or disagree with. Okay. I'm having a little bit of trouble here. It's where you organize everything in terms of the categories that you want to see, and that are organized in terms of the student learning objectives and your standards and different criteria that you want to see in your specific performance. So I apologize for the disorganizational thought process on that one. Two common approaches to developing a rating scale are additive scoring and continuous scoring. Additive scoring is a list of criteria that becomes developed as the list continues. And then continuous scoring is analogous to a checklist with each item equally weighted. And rubrics are a type of criteria-specific assessment that divides a task into constituent parts and provides descriptions for levels of performance in each category. So here's some benefits of using rubrics, and I apologize for the length of this slide, but there are quite a few of them. They can provide clear levels of accomplishment by defining tangible measures of achievement. Okay, so these are your categories of performance. What level have you accomplished? And then it defines exactly what that means. And that is very useful. It gives clear indications of what students need to accomplish in order to improve performance. So that kind of goes back up to the first thing listed there as well, that when you see it, when you and the students see exactly where they landed with the descriptor right there, they can tell, okay, what's the difference between this descriptor and the next highest, or even the very highest descriptor if they didn't get the highest descriptor. So what would I have needed to do to make this a perfect score? And so they can see it right there, because your descriptions are going to be incredibly useful for that particular purpose. It is a learner-centered approach to learning, performing, and assessing. So it's all based on what the learner does. And that's what we want. We want to assess actually what the learner does. That makes it authentic, and that's very good. Well, it's one idea of authenticity and authentic assessment. We know that from the Oosterhoff. A bridge between student learning and teacher expectation. This also wherein you're going to give the students the rubric before you assess them and evaluate them based on it, so that they can see what you're expecting, so then they can adjust their performance accordingly. It's kind of like when we do these presentations, or you do the hat journal or whatever else you've done for Dr. Speaker or Dr. Esther or whatever professor, whoever you've all had. You notice that they provide you with the rubric ahead of time, and that's very important, because then it allows you to look at it and say, okay, what's he looking for? How am I going to get the best grade I can possibly get? And I suppose a more for lack of a better word for it, the more sinister way of looking at that would be, okay, exactly how much work do I want to do, and then what grade is that, and am I okay with that? So that's kind of the dark side of sharing the rubric, but really the positives outweigh that big time. The students get to see exactly what you expect. And it, again, just like it says on the slide there, it's a bridge between the student learning and the teacher expectation. You communicate it directly to them with your descriptors. Versatility in meeting the needs of curriculum, student age and ability level, style of music, type of ensemble. Basically, the statement is rubrics are very versatile. They're very flexible. You can design them to do whatever you need them to do for specific tasks, specific assignments, specific styles of music. You're doing, jazz, orchestra, choir, swing choir, show choir, marching band, what's it today? The modern band movement, same thing. You can develop rubrics for that. So it doesn't matter age and ability level. I teach elementary general music. I've got 10 years worth of rubrics I've developed that I've had just simply packed away over the years of doing this. And I can, of course, that creates a nice file that I can just dig into whenever I think I need to be able to get something, or to get an idea of, okay, how do I want to assess this activity? Did I do something like that before? I can go grab it. And so student age and ability level, just to say, he's talking about, Dr. Wesolowski is talking about, he's talking about ensembles like band, orchestra, choir. So in Indiana, we're probably looking at 4th grade at the youngest, but it's all instrumental music. Probably middle school and high school is going to be more like it, to the grade level that he's talking about, the age and grade level. But you can also use this for elementary school too. I mean, these are useful even all the way down to preschool. I used to teach preschool at my first school that I taught at. And so, I used basic rubrics with them. I mean, all I did was just change some of the descriptors and change some of the expectations so that they're more age appropriate for a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. And you can still, tick off the boxes, check things off, put them in a category, or put their performance in a category, I should say, and be more specific. And then you can share that with parents. You can put it in a portfolio. You can send it home with the report cards. You can you can collect them, make copies of them, keep them in a folder for each child. And it's a lot of work, but to do that, but it could be well worth it. Parents really do appreciate, and this is something that I would share with anybody who wants to be a general elementary teacher, is parent contact and communication is one of the most important aspects of that job. And they would love to see rubrics for their children that describe what they can do. Because how else do they know? Unless they come to the concert, and then it also sort of depends on the SES that you're serving, and the community that you're serving. Can the parents make it out? The second school I worked for, we did our concerts during the day, because otherwise parents wouldn't be able to make it. So they had to be at home at night, so they wouldn't be able to make it otherwise. That, and we did have some that just simply wouldn't show up unless it was during the middle of the day. But you get that kind of attitude pretty much anywhere you go. It's just, it is how it is. It's also a valid and reliable form of individualized assessment and teacher accountability. Like, if this goes back to the versatility aspect, where it's very customizable, and you can literally make a rubric for each individual student. My first placement, I taught in a K-8 building, and I had 6th through 8 band all in the same room. And so I had beginners who were first years who had never touched an instrument before. They had no idea which end to blow in. And I had to teach them everything. In addition, I had 8th graders who've been playing for 2 years. This is their 3rd year. They're getting pretty proficient on their instruments. And the rubric for them is going to look more like, play, the B flat, E flat, A flat, and F scales in one octave on your instrument. all the scales out of the back of the Essential Elements book, of course. Hats off to Dr. Tim for his contributions to that wonderful method book. I've also used AOA, Accent on Achievement. That's a digression, but yeah, I mean, and what I would do is I would tailor all of my assignments. I would give weekly assignments to my students that were all tailored to what I thought their deficiencies were at that point in time. What did they need to work on? And I would just give them the assignment to do exactly that. Work on this exercise, and this exercise in the book, which targets exactly what you need to learn to improve. And then my rubric was very specific. It was exactly to each individual student. That's how specific it was. Each individual student had a different rubric. And what I would do is I would pull up that particular student's rubric, and I would have them play their playing test. And their playing test consisted of whatever the assignment was that I gave them for the week. So Friday was playing assessment day, and I would use the rubric, and I would use their personal rubric, and I would evaluate them using that information. And that was very helpful for me, and it was very helpful for them. And again, that's just a way that it can be very flexible, and you can actually make it very individualized and personal. So the rubric is also a quantitative means for evaluating and scoring qualitative performance-based tasks. This is due to giving each of the performance levels a numeric score. So wherever they fall, they get that score, and then you add them all up at the end, and that becomes the sum total of their performance. So it's a way to give a quantified score, which again, it was something I had trouble with when I was a beginner, turning that performance into a number so that I could put it in the electronic grading system. Sometimes I still have problems with doing that because it's very much something that you just want to say, yes, the skill is there, no, the skill is not, but the district is saying you got to put it all into PowerSchool or whatever you use, whatever SMS you use. So it's also a means for clearly implementing standards and course objectives in the evaluation process. So it's also a way to take the descriptions that are used in your state standards, sort of chop them up a little bit, maybe put everything it says in the standard in that top performance category. And then you sort of take things away and make it graduated from lowest to highest, to where then they're meeting the entire standard at the very end, and that's what gets them the perfect score. Other than that, you're not going to be exactly perfect because you didn't get everything in the standard, but you're getting most of the standard, you're getting some of the standard, you're getting very little of the standard, you're not meeting any of the standard at the very end. So you could just take whatever standard you're working on and use that as your complete picture of performance. You may have to adapt it a little bit depending on what you're doing and the age level that you're working with. I have to do this all the time when I'm working, particularly when I'm working with special ed. In my placement, I work with a lot of students with special needs, specifically life skills. Evaluating them is very different. I really just simply had to basically take whatever suggestions that the actual life skills teachers give me, and I just do whatever they tell me to do because they're the experts on it. They understand what these kids need and how to evaluate them. And I just take advice from that. And of course, that's another thing, take the advice from other teachers. If you have questions in particular about special ed, or particular also about just individual children, and okay, what's the deal with this? Don't ever be afraid to go to your colleagues and ask a question. It's one of the most beneficial things you can do. You learn, I mean, and that's another story. I can tell you stories about, what we've been doing this year, and teachers going around to other teachers' classrooms and things like that, and how much everybody's learned from it. It's just been a real positive experience. But that's for another completely other presentation. I've labored on long enough, I think, with this. And it's also a valuable means, it contains valuable information for parents regarding student performance and needs for improvement. So just like we were saying earlier on, this is a valuable tool for communicating student performance with parents, and parents love it. They love seeing where their children are. And I've even kind of made true believers of some parents by showing them a rubric that has descriptors on it, where it's maybe something where there's descriptors on it where maybe the parent didn't know that their child could do those sorts of things, especially in elementary school. You've got kids that are just fantastic at singing or playing an Orff instrument or playing the recorder. And, you put a rubric into their portfolio where like a student got a 4 out of 4 or something, and they're in that top category where they could teach it to others. And the next day I get a parent phone call, and I actually did this. The next day I get a parent phone call, and they said, this woman was almost in tears. This mom was like, just God bless you. I never knew my daughter could do that. I never knew she could play an instrument, and she could play it very well. So this is where you can really also build a rapport and a relationship with the parents and with the students, because again, it's a very valuable tool for giving that feedback. And the descriptors, the ability to put descriptors in there that actually say, what is it that this child can do? That's where the real benefit is, because it's not just a score. It's not just, hey, Bobby got a B+ today. Great. But what does that B+ mean? And I think that's what the real value is to the parents is, sure, he got a B, but what does it mean? It means, okay, so he's playing the recorder with a good tone. He's playing the recorder with good breath control. Maybe I don't know what that means, but okay, so he missed some notes. Maybe he played the right note at the wrong time. I mean, you would think that it would take more than that to get you a B, but at least the parent knows that that's what this means. It means, okay, my child can do this, this, and this, but they need to do this, this, and this in order to get better. And that's exactly what that bottom statement says. And again, this is my 10th year doing this, and I'm sure that anybody who's got some experience using these knows that all those things that I just mentioned under the benefits here are just completely true. All right, moving on. Types of rubrics. You've got holistic and analytic rubrics. A holistic rubric provides a single score for the overall performance. It's often broad enough to be generalizable to other situations. So for example, you've got a holistic rubric for a band contest performance. It should be generalizable enough that it can be used for choir, or it can be used for orchestra, for example, if it's for like a solo and ensemble, solo performance. So like, for example, my undergrad was clarinet and I've switched to voice now, but, clarinet, solo and ensemble, that should be a rubric, if it's a holistic rubric, that can be usable for saxophones, flutes, trumpets, tubas, trombones, the didgeridoo, the sackbut, the hurdy-gurdy, whatever solo instrument you can possibly think of. All right. And so then in opposition to that, you have the analytic rubric with multiple levels of criteria matched with descriptions of performance criteria scored on each individual dimension. This is what we normally think about with a rubric, okay? When we think about that multi-tiered, multiple categories, multiple levels of proficiency with the descriptors in each box, that's an analytic rubric. Because what you're doing is you've got multiple levels of criteria. You're looking for tone quality, dynamics, intonation, balance, and blend. Those are the multiple levels of criteria for your performance. Then you've got match with descriptions of performance criteria. So you've got maybe a needs improvement category, basic. You've got proficient, which again, for me would be my 100%. They're doing these things as expected. And then you've got above and beyond. So those are your description of performance criteria. And then you match them in a score on each individual dimension, and then you add them all up and they become your score. So creating your own rubric. All right, I'm really glad that Dr. Wesolowski mentioned some of this in his. I was expecting this out of the title of the article. The first thing you do is define the objectives, focus, and purposes for the assessment. So why are you doing the assessment? What's the point? That would be the purpose for the assessment. The objectives, the focus, what do you want the students to learn, your learning goals. We used to call these behavioral objectives. That's exactly what those are. You determine what you want to see. You establish the performance criteria and the learning outcomes. There should be absolutely no ambiguity in these aspects of your rubric, okay? What's the performance criteria? What are the outcomes you want to see? Those have to be very specific. You don't want to leave any room for guessing on that. You want them to be perfectly clear. So you have to be careful in your language, be as precise as you possibly can be. Determine the type of rubric to be used, holistic or analytic. Dr. Wesolowski makes the suggestion that if there's a considerable overlap in the learning outcomes, the holistic rubric might be the best choice. The analytic rubric, while it's time-consuming to create, it offers more information than the holistic rubric. Because of those multiple criteria that you're going to have on one side and the descriptions, including your proficiency, your performance criteria, and the different levels of achievement of performance that you're going to put into it also. So it's going to be more time consuming to set all that up, but then it's going to give you a lot more information when you finally plot it out like that. Not only a score, but then it's going to tell you something about it too, in a bit more detail than a holistic rubric would. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Next thing you'll do is develop the range and degrees of proficiency. Commonly, rubrics contain 3 to 5 categories of performance proficiency. Ensure that your vocabulary and terms are appropriate for your age and ability level of the group. So that's one of the ways you can change this, so that it's not necessarily, for example, the examples given in the book from him, or not in the book, but in the article, were geared towards high school. I believe it was high school band he focused on. But you could just simply change the vocabulary and maybe even what you call some of the categories, some of the degrees of proficiency. And what you would do is you could change some of that to be more age appropriate to, let's say, second grade or something like that. That's more up in their vocabulary range, something they would understand. Something I think I mentioned in my and one of my discussion board posts on this is, for example, for preschool and kindergarten, instead of even using words, you might just use a smiley face. Use a face, like, you got a smiley face, and that means you did it really well. Of course, my smile is a little wacky, it did it really well. Maybe a midline face for, well, okay, that was kind of okay, middle of the road, and then a frowning face for, you might need to do that better, or that we would call that needs improvement. As I would use for maybe 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, I have needs improvement, basic, proficient, advanced. So I wouldn't use those necessarily for like preschool or kindergarten. 1st grade, they're okay with that, as long as you explain it to them, tell them what it means. Advanced means you can teach it to somebody else. But the iconic notation, we're all familiar with the idea of iconic notation, works for this as well. It would work for K through 1, K through 2. Gosh, you could use that K through 5 even. The 5th graders would get a kick out of it, seeing a smiley face, as their, hey, you did it right. Smiley face with a thumbs up. That's your above and beyond. So there's all sorts of creative ways that you can come up with your degrees of proficiency and how you communicate that to the students, and the sky's the limit, and that's what makes these so flexible and everything. I enjoyed this article. I hope you can tell. So then the next thing you want to do after you've developed your degrees of proficiency, define appropriate task expectations and meaningful descriptors, and making sure that the totality of these descriptors are a comprehensive summary of what's being assessed. So now this is kind of the fancy schmancy way of saying, make sure that the highest level represents what you consider to be a perfect performance. Okay. It should include everything you're looking for, and so, yeah, that's just kind of a long way about it, but he makes a very good point there. All right. Creating your own rubric, number 3, page 3. So the next part is, and the final part is, choosing a scoring scale with clearly defined cut points. Now that's his term, not mine. And what he means is where you're going to separate each different degree of proficiency and degree of performance. And then how are you going to divide the points among those categories? He gives 3 methods for doing it. One is you can assign each scale level a point value, and then sum each descriptor to reach a defined grade according to a predetermined scoring guide. So this obviously indicates that you've got an outside guide to how you're going to interpret the information given in the assessment. You're going to interpret that by a means of a numeric score, which then fits into another guide that tells you what the grade is going to be. 2 is assign each level a point value while weighting each descriptor according to its importance within the total assessment. So this is a combination of using a rubric with a weighted grade sort of idea. You're weighting each descriptor according to its importance, right? So if, for example, my objective is, let's say I'm teaching fifth grade recorders and I'm just trying to make sure that they're playing with a good tone quality. What I might do is make tone quality 50% of the grade. And then pitch and rhythm, they're not really so important to me right now because I'm just trying to make sure that you're playing with a good tone. So yeah, we're playing exercise 1 or 2 off of my, personally created group of exercises, which is actually based off of some, saxophone excerpts that I pulled out and redid, and so to make it so that they would be good for recorder, they would work for recorder. So maybe if I'm not really worried about so much about whether or not you played B instead of G, as long as you played it with a good tone quality, that's really what I'm looking for. But still, I want to reinforce the idea that pitch and rhythm are important aspects of music, because they're very important aspects of anything you play. Well, so maybe what I'll do is I'll do like 50%, then 25, 25, 50% for the tone quality, 50% or 25% for pitch, 25% for rhythm. And so then it makes it so that, pitch and rhythm are worth not as much as the tone quality at that point, if that's what I'm really focusing on. So that's a good example of that. Or the third method of creating a scoring scale is to just simply assign each level a numeric or letter value. And I think this is more along the lines of what we normally do. It's just whatever level of proficiency, wherever you happen to land, wherever the student happens to land in those particular categories, it's just, that's the score, you add it up, that's the grade. All right, I think that's a very common thing that we tend to do. All right, moving on. So the last section, a valuable tool. Okay, so this article has been a brief introduction to the development and use of rubrics. So as you become more comfortable with how they're used, how they're created, how they're developed, you'll be able to make your own variations that you're developing for individual circumstances, even individual students, as I've done. And they become great, effective tools for enhancing music learning and even your own instruction. Okay, so let's move on. Critique and practical application. Okay, the article is directed mostly towards what I call masters of ensembles, band directors, orchestra directors, choir directors. He does not mention anything about elementary general. Although I think I mentioned this down maybe on the next page, but many, if not most of us, we already have some experience with using and developing rubrics. But this has information for both beginner and experienced educators in terms of assisting us in terms of even being able to design and make them if we don't know how. If we've never done this before, it can give you a good guide for that. Or if you've already had some experience with it, maybe it gives you some idea of how you can refine it. It certainly did with me. I've got ideas of how I'm going to make rubrics later on. Now for just reading this article, I'm glad I did it. I would have liked to see some more discussion of the different types of rubrics and how to create scoring tables and proficiency categories. This is something I struggled with at first, is, okay, how many categories do I give? What's my justification for giving these categories? What should I call them? How do I write my descriptors? This has always been something that I would really love to see him talk about a little bit more detail. He also mentions the Likert type scale, but he doesn't really give an example of how it can be used in a rubric. He prefers the criteria-specific scale without an explanation. I did find an outside source that talked about this by Chorba and Smith. They state that Likert type scales often display a high degree of reliability, but their validity may remain uncertain. And this may be why he prefers the criteria-specific scales. So practical application. This assists beginner educators in understanding, developing, and implementing rubrics. It also assists experienced educators in developing and implementing rubrics and maybe even refining their processes for the future. Conclusion and overall impression. I think for the most part, this is a well-written article. It's very articulate. The concepts are also applicable to elementary general classroom. Only the details of the example rubrics in the article would need to be changed to make them fit the elementary general paradigm. So it's just details. The major structural elements are all there. All you'd have to do is change the details, some of the vocabulary around, and bada bing, bada boom, you've got an elementary general rubric for whatever your purposes may be. So it's very useful information for anybody who would ever need to basically ever assess a student for anything. I found an article that concurred with Wesolowski here from Hale and Green. They basically gave the exact same structure that Wesolowski gave, how to create it, and also agreed with him that the students need to be made aware of what's in it and how it will be used to assess them, stating, as Wesolowski does, that the descriptors should be expressed in concrete behavioral terms that your students can understand. Okay, and as you can see, here's the reference page. The other two articles that I got, if you're interested in elementary general music teaching, the Hale and Green article here, the 6 key principles for music assessment, that is a really good article. I saved that for my own personal use as well. I'm going to be making very good use of that. All right, so I hope you enjoyed my presentation today. You guys all have a wonderful night, and my school is now on spring break, so I'm going to try to enjoy that as much as I can as well. All right, thank you guys.